right, so I know that you've been in and around newsrooms since 2006. What's the biggest difference between being in a newsroom then versus now?
Well, I've had maybe a less traditional path to my current job than some of my peers. I actually came up through magazines. So I started with the Walrus under Ken Alexander fairly early in its lifespan, and then to Maclean in Canadian Business, which were both sort of under Ken White's publishing empire at the time. I switched to newspapers just in the last 4 years. So the difference between magazine journalism and newspaper journalism has been interesting. Going into, I'm not giving you a great answer here. Let me try coming in again. It seems like every job that I've had in the last 10 years, I have arrived in the newsroom and my peers have said, you just missed it. You just missed the golden age. The party's over. And there's no more money. There are no more trips. So it feels like for the last 10 years that I've been doing this job, the industry's been in a perpetual state of decline. And yet everywhere I've gone, I've felt pretty good about the ability to do good work.
So what is this golden age that you're talking about? What have we missed out on?
I don't know. I think that, there's no doubt that newsrooms used to be bigger and that there used to be bigger travel budgets. There used to be more resources devoted to things like foreign correspondence. And I'm not going to tell you that news gathering in Canada wouldn't be in a better place if we still had more journalists in this country. On the other hand, the luxury of having so many resources, I think, led editors and journalists to make decisions about covering stories that weren't always good ones that we wouldn't necessarily do today. I'll give you an example. When I was the city editor at the Ottawa Citizen for a couple of years recently, okay. That newspaper used to consider itself a paper of record for the city of Ottawa and the surrounding areas. And part of that meant that every time somebody died in a single vehicle accident, they would send a reporter out and they would do the whole story of the person's life and the car crash and whatever. Every time there was a significant house fire in the city, it was a major story. Every single school board meeting, every single procedural committee meeting at City Hall was something that they would send a reporter to. And a lot of those stories don't require a whole lot of digging by the reporters. They're not necessarily bringing things to light that wouldn't otherwise be brought to light. They're not asking the reporters all the time to use their entrepreneurial skills to tell people in the city something that they don't know and that they're not going to get from any other news outlet. And one of the real challenges that newsrooms have right now is to do things that are unique, that are compelling, that offer value for readers, and that give readers, hopefully, a reason to pay for that news, or at the very least, to pay for it with their attention. It's really hard to do that. It's really hard to offer that kind of value to readers if you're doing the same kind of story as everybody else is, and if you're just covering what we call agenda news, which is kind of what just comes down the pipe at you.
So where do you think journalism is going to be headed now? Where do you think people are going to get their news?
I don't know, but I think people will get their news. I mean, it's funny. I'm a digital native, but I'm also a very analog guy. I play board games. I buy records. I subscribe to magazines. I love the newspaper, and I love the traditional way of delivering news, but I'm not actually all that attached to it. And, if newspapers as a concept, or magazines, or whatever legacy media platform it is, if they go away, I'm not concerned about that as long as the journalism is still being delivered. The question is, how effectively will the journalism be delivered? And that's where you start to get into some big questions. For all that the entry of outlets like Vice and BuzzFeed and now The Guardian into the Canadian marketplace have been good things, and they have unquestionably been good things. It's a branch plant model of journalism that makes you wonder, well, if traditional media went away, who's going to cover City Hall in Windsor? Who's going to cover the school board in Saskatoon? The crowdfunding models, the crowdfunding experiments, we've seen things like Joey Coleman in Hamilton being crowdfunded to cover City Hall. They're interesting, and perhaps they can work out in the future, but so far there aren't really a lot of proofs of concept that kind of model can work in Canada. Maybe the old model needs to fall apart completely before audiences and advertisers will fully embrace that kind of new model to the level that it needs to succeed. I don't know. But it is a little scary as a guy who cares about news and about holding powerful people and institutions to account, to look at a future of 5, 10 years, 1 year out, and wonder who's actually going to do that.
So some have said that the convergence of newsrooms will not result in better journalism. In what ways do you think the convergence of newsrooms will help better journalism?
What do you mean by convergence of newsrooms?
Well, now that Postmedia has kind of bought a whole bunch of newsrooms, and newsrooms are no longer needing that many people, and they're kind of combining newspapers together, do you, some say that that's not going to help journalism, but do you think that...
Oh, I see. Well, it goes back to what I was saying a few moments ago. I'm not going to tell you that if you have 20 journalists covering a city, you're better off necessarily than if you have 40 journalists covering a city. But there's a big question about what those journalists do, right? And the fact that the entire industry is on fire and that there's ample evidence that, you cannot, as a journalist, as an editor, as a newspaper publisher, you can't just take an audience's attention for granted. That really needs to encourage those 20 journalists, or however many they are, to be more creative, to take more chances, to do work that is going to matter more. So hopefully there's there's a reaction in Canadian newsrooms to the plight of the industry, with journalists and editors realizing if we've only got the resources to tell 10 stories today, by God, we better make those 10 great stories. We better make them count. So
you're saying, would it be a lot harder, or would it be not capable at all to have those great stories done just via digital media?
Oh yeah, no, you can do them via digital media. I'm platform agnostic about it, right? I mean, I think you tell the story in a way that makes the most sense for the audience, and I think that there are nice things about print, certainly, and the business model that exists, even though revenue streams attached to print products are decaying in Canada and around the world, there's still a pretty significant part of revenue for any news operation. The exceptions like La Presse are unusual in the world because there is still so much revenue attached to print, whether you're the Windsor Star or the New York Times.
So you bring
sorry, go ahead.
No, go on. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
I was just going to say, if whether you're doing stuff for a website or you're doing stuff for a newspaper, it doesn't really matter as long as the audience is there and as long as you've got some kind of supporting business model. And nobody has cracked the digital ad revenue question effectively, except when, in the case of somebody like BuzzFeed, the answer is huge amounts of branded content combined with just massive scale, the kind of thing that's out of reach for most local news organizations. I don't know what the answer is to fund news gathering in Canada and local news gathering in Canada via digital, but again, maybe if we end up with a vacuum in this country, we'll end up with some solutions by necessity.
So you bring up La Presse, and La Presse is one of the very few papers to switch from paper to strictly digital. And given their success in ad revenue on their tablet, why do you think so many other papers are reluctant to switch from paper to just strictly digital?
I mean, it's a cart and horse question, right? I mean, there's a bit of a trust fall. The Toronto Star, for example, has the Toronto Star has purchased La Presse's platform, and they have a product that's very, very similar to what La Presse Plus is is putting out in the Quebec market. But they also still make a lot of money on print. I think that in some circles there's a conception, and it's a misconception, that print is a total millstone dragging down revenues. People still buy newspapers, people still subscribe to them, and people do still buy ads in them. There is money attached to that. So to suddenly just cut off your print product, to mothball it because you're hoping to catalyze digital audience growth or digital revenue growth, not very many publications are in a place where they can actually do that, because you are throwing away a significant amount of revenue. La Presse's model is interesting, but part of what makes it viable, to the extent that we think it is viable, is the fact that they have such a different market situation than anybody else in Canada and anybody else in North America, really, right? Because they have maybe not a captive audience, but they have a very unique audience. They have a robust French language audience that cares deeply about its own culture as distinct from American culture or culture from around the Anglosphere, that has its own celebrity system. And there's nobody competing for that, right? I mean, if the Globe and Mail or the National Post publishes a story, we're competing with the Washington Post, the New York Times, the BBC, the Guardian, BuzzFeed, Vice, right on down the line for an audience's attention. But there's so much less competition for that audience's attention in Franco-Quebec. I think that one of the places will be interesting to watch in terms of dropping print products is what happens with Canadian magazines. Because, the secular problems, the secular revenue challenges for print are severe in Canadian magazines, right? But you have a couple of corporate owners with relatively deep pockets and with an interest in digital content. Perhaps they'll be more ambitious than most other Canadian news publishers in deciding to scale back or to drop the print product. You're starting to see signs of that already when you see what Rogers Publishing has done with Flair, for example, taking it off newsstands, going to more of a directed circulation approach, and really ramping up the digital play. I think that may be an experiment that we start to see repeated with other titles or by other publishers.
So do you think if people start going to get their news online, do you think that will create better quality of news or less quality and less accurate as a result?
I don't think accuracy is a problem. I mean, I think if anything, there's more accuracy. Like the immediacy of the audience response to journalism now that's facilitated by digital publishing is a good thing for the most part, right? I mean, if you make a mistake in your story, whether it's a typo, whether it's an inaccurate headline, whether it's a completely faulty premise, you're going to hear about it. You're going to hear about it immediately, and you're going to hear about it publicly in a way that makes it very difficult for you to say, you know what, we're not going to fix that headline, or you know what, who cares if these people think the premise of the story was wrong? We're sticking by it. That's a good thing. There are some more worrisome aspects of the online pack mentality, but that fact-checking function that it serves, that can only be a good thing for fair and accurate reporting.
But don't you think it's better if newsrooms kind of have the night to get their research, to compile all these information, get the facts before they publish a story?
Well, nobody's saying they don't. I mean, nobody is putting a gun to the head of any editor, anybody in any newsroom who's in the position to make a decision about this as to when they publish, right? If I know right now that a story is breaking, I have a choice to make. I can get something up online immediately, or I can take some time with it. I can think about what we can add to the story. I can think about what we can do that's unique. We can make sure that we get it right. There is a pressure, sure, to be fast and to be early and to get exclusive stuff, but that doesn't outweigh the fundamental responsibility to get things right. And anybody who is rushing to get a story online without making it good is screwing up. Look, it happens, to be sure. I'm not gonna pretend it doesn't happen, right? I mean, we have, just at the National Post, I think in the last couple of weeks we had a story posted that was posted in haste based on, I think it was a court verdict, something like that, and there was, what you do when you have a story like that is usually before the verdict, the reporter will write, you'll call it a shirt tail or a basement, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, a few hundred words that go at the bottom of the story, and you put the verdict or whatever is coming as the breaking news, you leave room for it at the top so that as soon as you've got that news, you can publish the story. There was an editor's note that was published as part of the story down below in the fifth or sixth graph. It wasn't anything particularly damning or harmful. It's just a little bit embarrassing because you can see there somebody has pressed publish without giving it the extra read. Those mistakes happen, but, they don't need to. It's still something that's within the control of editors and journalists in the newsroom to take that extra minute, give something that extra read, and publish it.
Okay, so how does a traditional media such as National Post, and when you were with Postmedia, how do these traditional mediums stay alive in a shifting environment?
I don't know. And if you know, then I have an office for you on the 12th floor of this building. Nobody knows, right? I think that everybody who thinks they have the answer one day is going to be humbled the next. A year or two ago, we were all watching with admiration as The Guardian spent tens of millions of dollars on this vast digital global expansion. And lots of us said, wow, The Guardian is really doing things right. They're going into new English-speaking markets. They're building scale. They've got a fantastic brand. They're doing great journalism, advocacy journalism that really connects with their readers. And now they're in a position where they have spent so much money so quickly and have expanded to the point where it is so unsustainable that they're having to cut. You look at the blue chip news brands internationally, like the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. They have some successes, to be sure. They've also had some very, very, very significant challenges, right? And those that are looking today like they know what they're doing, inevitably there are going to be setbacks in the next few weeks, months, days, I don't know. I don't think anybody really has the answer. There are vague generalities and there are platitudes about doing good journalism and finding an audience, but man, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that's bigger than any one media organization, to be honest. This isn't a problem that the New York Times is going to solve on its own. It's not a problem that the Wall Street Journal is going to solve on its own. It's not a problem that the National Post is going to solve on its own. It's a broad digital advertising and publishing and platform question that nobody anywhere knows the answer to.
So what would be a one piece of advice you would give the upcoming group of journalists that are about to enter the field?
What I always tell journalists or people who want to be journalists, and I've kind of given them the same spiel for years, I guess, since I started interviewing potential internship candidates, 8-9 years ago in magazines, is if you want to get into journalism, that's great. But if there is anything else that you want to do with your life, think very hard about it. And do not get into journalism. Don't commit to it unless you really love it, unless you think it is the only thing that is going to make you happy. Because there is a 9 out of 10 chance that it's going to break your heart soon. That's not a reason to not do it. And partly that whole spiel is to just kind of throw some cold water in people's faces. But it is hard. It's very, very hard to get into it, and it's hard to stay in it. And it's hard to age in the business right now because everything is so uncertain. Mm-hmm. I think that other than that, the advice that I would give people is that the fundamentals of journalism, whatever changes about the business of it, whatever changes about how we get stories to people or how people find stories, and whatever changes about the mode in which those stories are delivered, whether it's video, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a listicle, whatever it is, the fundamentals of reporting and storytelling and diligence, and challenging the institutions and people in this world that need to be challenged, that's never changing. And those same musty, boring set of skills that you learn and that every journalist needs to learn, those are not going away. So make sure that you have a good grasp of those, and then, the rest, you'll figure it out.
That was a great answer. I love how you brought everyone down and then brought everyone back up. Okay, so final question. Suppose everyone goes to digital media and we're all just behind our computers. What's going to be the one thing you miss about newsrooms the most?
The camaraderie. And this is me again being silly and romantic, right? The kid who grew up, who watched the Redford and Hoffman movie, All the President's Men. That's probably too young in age. Going into a newsroom and being surrounded with, a crazy cast of characters who are obsessive and driven and off the wall and who swear like sailors and who have every possible, ridiculous opinion under the sun, but who are dedicated in pursuit of some kind of abstract goal, like a sense of community responsibility. That's amazing. And the buzz that you hear in a newsroom when people are in pursuit of a story is really, really, really cool. The minutes or hours or days when those people know that they know something, that they need to get out there into the public eye, and they're building that story. It's exciting. It's an adrenaline rush. And, it does bad things to people's egos, right? Because you end up with people who have an inflated sense of their own self-importance.
Of course.
But it's so much fun. And it feels good. It really does. So it's not to say that you will not get that rush if you're working in a structure that's different from a traditional newsroom. But that drug is plentiful in a traditional newsroom, and it is intoxicating.
You won't be passing notes around back and forth, running around with stacks of paper all around you.
Yeah, and I mean, not to pretend like I'm sitting here with suspenders and a cigar in my mouth in front of a typewriter, like I'm banging away on Slack all day, right?
Yeah.
But the teamwork and the sense of mission is pretty cool, and I know that they have that at new media startups as well. I don't mean to say that it's only something that exists in dusty old legacy newsrooms, but it's nice to be part of a team of people who are joined together in a mission. And the job that I had as city editor at the Ottawa Citizen, that was the best thing about it. It was a group of people who were there genuinely because they felt like they were serving the city of Ottawa. And there was a sense of responsibility about that that they took very seriously. And it was a real privilege to get to be part of that.
Okay, thank you so much, Jordan. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to me.
Well, thank you very much for your interest, and I hope you've got something you can use.
This was great.
And,
All
take care of yourself.